There's a place on Ocean Avenue where the spirits like to mess with you. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. In 1965, Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his family, his wife and their 5 kids, moved into a nice 3-story Dutch colonial at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. It's on Long Island, and it's in Suffolk County. Now, Ronald was the sales manager at Briganti Carl car dealership, where he made a very good living, apparently, because this 6-bedroom house was attainable for a sales manager at a car dealership. Now, why am I surprised by that? Well, when I was growing up, my dad was a sales manager at a car dealership and did not, I mean, he made fine money, but he did not make that kind of money. Like, that's nice house. So, a little, I mean, it's got a boat slip, it's on a river, like, it's just down the street from the marina. This is a home. For the next 9 years, Ronald's family would get along just fine in their home and in their lives. They were living in a gorgeous home, in a gorgeous place, and they seemed to love it. The family had friends, the kids were doing well in school, and Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was at this time 23, had begun working under his father at the dealership. Now, he did struggle with some heroin and LSD problems and also antisocial personality disorder, but it was the 70s, everyone did that. And as far as anyone could tell of the DeFeo family, they were a good family. They were staunch Catholics. They had a statue of the Virgin Mary in their front yard. There were angels. There was Joseph holding the baby Jesus. Like, these were, bada bing, bada boom Italians. And I can say that because my last name is Piombino. Now, of course, beneath all of this lay a dark secret. The DeFeos were connected to the Genovese crime family. You see, the Brigantis were pretty high up. They were basically, the lowest ranking officers in the family, so to speak. Now, if you were wondering how they owned this home, that's why. But everything would change for the DeFeo family when on November 13th, Ronald DeFeo Jr. walked into Henry's Bar at 180 Merrick Road, about half a mile down the street from his home, and proclaimed to everyone there that his parents had been killed. Several friends followed him back to the house, where they discovered that, in fact, his family had been killed, and one Joe Yeswit immediately called Suffolk County Police, who showed up and began the investigation, but really didn't know where it was going at first. In the initial stages, they wondered, was this a robbery gone wrong? Was this a case of domestic violence? But the crime scene very quickly showed that this was something far more sinister than really either of those things. You see, both parents and 4 of the 5 children, Ronald not included, of course, had been shot face down in their beds. Now, the parents had each been shot twice, and the 4 other children had each been shot once. The mother had been shot twice while she was alive, it appears, and the younger daughter also appears to have been alive when she was killed. So, this was a systematic killing. All 6 murders had been committed with the same .35 caliber Marlin lever-action rifle, which was missing from the scene of the crime. Ronald was questioned by police, and his initial belief was that this was a mob hit, that a rival crime family had decided to try and kill his family as vengeance for some slight. But the alleged hitman actually turned out to be out of state and had a rock-solid alibi, at which point Ronald just broke down and confessed to the murders. He claimed that once he started the killings, he simply couldn't stop himself, and then gave a very detailed account of what happened, where he stashed his clothes, where he stashed the rifle, and the various cartridges. Now, despite this pretty black and white confession, DeFeo's lawyer had some tricks up his sleeve. William Weber, attorney at law, decided to mount an insanity defense, and while his side's psychiatrist actually backed him up, the psychiatrist for the prosecution pointed out that while DeFeo was under the influence commonly of heroin and LSD, LSD of course has a rather permanent effect on your brain and prolonged use can drive you to madness, and he also had antisocial personality disorder, despite all of this, he was aware of his actions. This was not something that happened during a fit of psychosis. He deliberately went in and killed his family. And his reasoning didn't totally stack up either. You see, while the Warrens would successfully drive people to use an insanity defense based on demonic possession in the 80s, didn't quite fly yet in the 70s. And DeFeo's insistence that he heard voices in his head telling him he had to kill his family or they were going to kill him just didn't hold up. He could not adequately convince the jury, and they sentenced him to 6 consecutive sentences of 25 to life. Theoretically, he could get out of prison, if he had lived, around 21, 24. Unfortunately for Ronald, but fortunately for the rest of us, he died in prison in March of 2021 of undisclosed causes. But the real story here, the Amityville Horror that we all know and love, the 1979 movie and then the mid-2000s movie and the other 5 movies that were based off of it, all came about because of the family of George Lutz, who moved into the house December 18th, 1975. Now, the house had been unoccupied for about 13 months at that point, which is ominous to say the least. And George was a newlywed. He had just married his wife, Kathy. They had 3 children from Kathy's previous marriage, who George had actually legally adopted and had their names changed to match his own. George was a land surveyor and didn't really seem to be all that interested in writing books or movies or anything like that. So it would make sense that, he would be a reliable source. He didn't appear on the outside to be someone who would be super concerned with the occult. Of course, that was not the case. George maintained an air of rationalism throughout everything, and his decisions seemed to be rooted more in his Catholic faith, although he was formerly a Methodist, than any sort of interest in fame, wealth, or the occult. He knew what had happened in the house and knew that getting it for $80,000, the equivalent of $440,000 today, was a steal for the property. It should have gone for much closer to $1 million modern-day dollars. But since Suffolk County's worst murder in history had been committed in the house just a year prior, he decided to have a priest come and bless it. And this is where the spooks begin. But it's also where the controversy begins, because while the priest, referred to in the books and movies as Father Mancuso, apparently went in and blessed the house and had this whole set of experiences, the priest who allegedly was the one referenced by the Lutz family, Father Pecoraro, claims he was never in the home. But then in an interview, a man claiming to be Father Pecoraro, but appearing in silhouette to hide his identity that he had just disclosed, claimed that he did in fact go to the house and asserted that yes, he did feel cold spots in the sewing room, and yes, some disembodied force slapped him in the face and told him to get out. Though at the same time, he disagreed with certain aspects of the story. In the movie and the books, the priest is swarmed by flies, but this alleged Father Pecoraro was not keen on that description. He says that while there were flies in the house, he himself was not swarmed by them. It gets a little bit more complicated, though, because in a Newsday article, which of course doesn't show Pecoraro, but it does quote him, he says that he never actually went to the house, and he'd only ever interacted with the Lutz family over the phone. In any case, if a priest did come and bless the house, it didn't really do much, because for the next 28 days that the Lutzes actually lived in the home, they were plagued by all sorts of paranormal activity. They reported telephone static that would come on the line anytime they tried to communicate with the police or with the clergy. Green ooze also would seep from the walls, swarms of flies would appear, they'd hear stamping noises upstairs, and allegedly, there were some incidents of levitation. This eventually escalated to the point that on January 14th, 1976, the Lutzes just up and ran out of the house, left all of their belongings behind, and refused at any point to go back in. And at this point, our beloved Warren family gets involved. Now, Ed and Lorraine Warren put together a team of reporters, cameramen, and parapsychologists. Now, you look at the term parapsychologist and you might say, that sounds scientific. It's not. Parapsychology is a field of pseudoscience that studies the interactions between human beings and the psychic world. Now, there is some, and I must stress, it's a small amount of evidence that parapsychology might be based in something. Both the United States and the Soviet Union did study things like remote viewing throughout the 60s and 70s to see if they could perhaps gain an edge on one another. But as far as we know, as far as has been declassified, there was never any success. While in the house, parapsychologists did report that they had encountered dark forces and energy. Ed Warren claimed that he was pushed to the ground and held there by some sort of unseen force. Lorraine was plagued with visions of the actual family laying in their beds dead, and she also claims that she felt though she was pushed. And the one solid concrete piece of evidence from all of this comes from a camera that was set up upstairs facing two of the bedrooms. In the picture, which is to my right, you will see a head and white glowing eyes which appear to be peeking out of one of the bedrooms. It was claimed that this photo was taken during the night that they were all there actually doing their investigation. It was an infrared camera set up to automatically take pictures if it detected movement. They went through several reels of film, according to the Warrens family website, but only captured this one really solid image. And there has been controversy about the picture. Some people claim that it's doctored, though, as far as anybody knows, it is the original image. Others claim that one of the people in the house at the time was actually the person caught on camera, and then people who believe the Warrens claim that it was the ghost of the youngest boy, John. In any case, the house went on to sell to another family, and the Warrens left as if nothing happens. It remains up on their website that this entire thing was in fact paranormal, but there's not really a ton of evidence for it. And I have a lot of questions about the story that is told, as did many people at the time. For example, William Weber, DeFeo's defense attorney, and someone who actually knew the Lutz family, claimed that one night over a bottle of wine, or several bottles of wine, he and the Lutzes concocted the entire story so that they could sell a book. But the Lutzes deny that this ever happened, and it later came out that during the time period when he claimed this, he was actually actively engaged in a lawsuit against the Lutzes and may have simply been trying to discredit them. Eventually, the Lutzes would settle out of court. Furthermore, neighbors never really reported hearing or seeing anything. The DeFeos had never heard or seen anything, and the neighbors had apparently also just not noticed 8 gunshots going off in the middle of the night on November 13th, 1974. So how reliable are the neighbors? Probably not very. The Marlin rifle that he was using was not suppressed, and even if it had been, you can hear a suppressed rifle from a house away. So how reliable are the neighbors? Probably not very. But the Cromartie family, who purchased the houses from the Lutzes, also never really noticed anything. So, is the house haunted, or were the Lutzes haunted? It's also worth mentioning that the Cromartie family claimed that none of the damage to the locks or the windows or other physical signs that something had gone wrong in the house were actually there. All of the locks appeared to be original, the windows weren't broken, so some aspects of the story are just outright false. But a wrench gets thrown into the skepticism with the Lutz children, who themselves are skeptics and have argued for years now that what happened in their home was grossly exaggerated by the person who wrote the book, as well as Hollywood. For example, Daniel Lutz claims that his stepfather, George, had always been obsessed with the occult. Daniel was 10 at the time, and probably would have been aware of an obsession with the paranormal. He would have been mature enough to recognize that that was actually something that was going on. And Daniel had other criticisms of his father. He claimed that George Lutz was inconsistent and obsessive and just kind of not a reliable source. But at the same time, he did corroborate some of the claims. For example, cold spots around the house. He said that, yeah, sometimes rooms would be unusually cold. As well, one incident that occurs in the story of the Amityville Horror told in the books and the movie is that a window slammed on Daniel's hand, but miraculously it didn't break any fingers. At the same time, he does bear an injury from that window slamming on his hand, so clearly something did break. Then again, he was 10 years old, and the interview was conducted in 2012, for something that happened in 1975, so there is a possibility that his memory from the time period is a little bit fuzzy. Other accounts come from Chris Lutz, who was 7 at the time. Chris very explicitly says that he feels the events in the book were stretched to the point of fiction, but that wording is important because he doesn't claim they never happened, just that they were massively exaggerated. He seems to echo Daniel's sentiment that things did happen in the house, but just not to the extent that is told in the story. Furthermore, William Weber, the defense attorney for DeFeo, who ended up in a lawsuit with the Lutzes, kind of backs this up by saying that what they did was use real-life events and then exaggerate them heavily for the storyline. Also, Chris Lutz would corroborate the claims that there were flies, though the swarming effect was a little bit exaggerated. He did say there were an unusual number of flies in the house, like more than you would expect, but not to the extent that they were, like, physically covering anyone. And to throw even more confusion onto things, both George and Kathy Lutz passed a polygraph test in the 1970s. Now, polygraphs are really only about 60% effective, but, you know, that's more effective than not. So, were they lying? Were they exaggerating? Were they telling the whole truth? Probably not the last one, but the middle one seems plausible. And it seems to be agreed upon by both of the Lutz boys that while events in the books and the film were exaggerated, these things like the stamping sounds, the cold spots, and the flies definitely did happen to them, or at least they remember them happening. Now the part you've all been waiting for, my immaculate analysis. I believe, based on this story, and you can tell me in the comments if you agree with me or not, that if there was a haunting here, it was not a haunting of the house. Now, could a murder, like the one that occurred, create a situation where there is a nexus for evil? Absolutely. Demonic spirits, ghosts, all of this can coalesce, as far as demonology suggests, in places where tragedies have happened. You might recognize this kind of thing from other religions, as well as things like Star Wars, where a tragic event can create a wound in the Force. It's kind of the same idea with demonology. When something horrible happens, it creates a point at which the veil between our world and the spirit realm are not quite as solid as we would like it to be. And George, in his obsession with the occult, could well have made some key mistakes. In our last video about the Warrens, we mentioned that they had a psychic medium come and talk to the girls who were living in the house. Not the Warrens, but the girls brought the medium in. And the demon that would later inhabit the Annabelle doll lied to them and said that it was the ghost of a small child. Now, could George, seeking to make something happen so he could achieve that 15 minutes of fame, have committed some sort of seance or summoning ritual or used a Ouija board? Any of these things are possible, and if anything did happen in the home, it seems more likely to me that that's why than that the house itself was haunted. Because if it was haunted, the people who moved in afterwards would have reported something, and the people who moved in after them. The house actually eventually had its address changed from 112 to 108 Ocean Avenue to deter tourists. Like, that's how intense the scrutiny of this home was. But nobody living in the home reported anything after the Lutzes. So, if something was going on, it seems pretty clear to me that it was associated with George Lutz, not 112 Ocean Avenue. And unfortunately, as with many of these cases, because of the intensity of the scrutiny, and because of people like the Warrens, and freaking book and movies that exaggerated the hell out of all of it, it's going to be hard to know what actually was going on. Is there any truth to this? We're not going to know because it's been blown so out of proportion by Hollywood. Now, the later Amityville Horror movie that stars Jared Padalecki actually was a little bit more believable. The original one is, like, really cheesy late 70s horror. So, if you ever do think that your home is haunted, please don't call the Warrens. Call me. Well, don't call me. I don't have a phone number listed, but email me. And we'll read it, probably, and get back to you. And if you're close to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, maybe we'll drive out and check out your house. Bless you. But as always, if you want to let us know if you have a haunting, we would love to come check it out. We're trying to do more haunted stuff. Haunted stuff is fun. But as always, I'd like to know what you guys think, so let us know in the comments. Do you think this was a real haunting? Do you think this was wildly exaggerated? Do you think that, I'm being too skeptical? Let us know. Tell us. And if you want to support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, check us out on Patreon. You can get a subscription to all of our exclusive content over there for $1 a month. We have a brand new Drunk Folklore episode coming out. It is a lot. So for exclusive content to support what we're doing, check us out over on Patreon. You can also become a member of this channel, and you can shop our Amazon store or our Target sponsorship via the links in the description. You can also join our Discord to stay up to date and chat with other fans, and we're in there too, so we hang out sometimes and chat with you. And if you're a fan of bean juice, you can check out our coffee, Mount Pocono Perk from Tableau Roasting Company. The link to that is also in the description. Once again, I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.